All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Racing Form Breeders' Cup handicapping session brought to you by Keeneland Select. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you for another edition of these handicapping sessions, joined by the man who produces and shares his screen and does so much work behind the scenes putting these together, Mike Hogan. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Pete. This is the third one of these live broadcasts we've done today, so I'm excited to hear what Mike and Dan have to say.
Well, let's introduce our special guest for this edition of the panel. Our first guest, you know him from all the great work he does at DRF Live and from his eponymous blog. He is DRF.com's handicapping editor, Dan Illman. Dan, what's going on?
Nothing much other than a lot of work handicapping these Breeders' Cup races. I'm really looking forward to this session, guys. Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. We're also being joined by another handicapper from the DRF team. He's the New York analyst. He's helped us out a lot over the course of the last few months in these handicapping sessions, doing a tremendous job identifying winners on these sessions in print via DRF Live. He's Mike Beer. Mike, what's the story?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm glad. I feel like I'm finally done looking at the Breeders' Cup races. I'm happy about that.
That's a great question. I almost feel like it's gets to a question. Any great artist, a filmmaker, a painter, you have to get to that point where you say, hey, I'm done. It's over. It's time to move on. I've done enough. It's good to hear that you've reached that point, Mike. Can't wait to hear.
I don't have any choice whether I want to be done or not. I have to be done.
The deadline has come.
The deadline has come.
All right, well, we're going to be going through all 13 of these Breeders' Cup races over the course of the next hour. If you have questions, the great thing about doing these webinars live, you can submit questions. We can answer them in real time. This is a great chance to get access to terrific handicapping minds like Mike and Dan. So go ahead and use the tool in the webinar that Mike Hogan is showing right now to submit your questions, and hopefully we'll get to as many as we can, either race by race, or hopefully we'll be able to have a minute at the end of the show to answer those as well. If you want to go back, and I'll probably mention this again at the end of the broadcast, but I'll mention it up top too. If you want to access the archive of this show, you can always go to drf.com/YouTube to listen to this or any of the other handicapping sessions we've done this week. We've had some great stuff from top DRF handicappers across the country providing insight on the Breeders' Cup races, the first of which goes as the 6th at Santa Anita on Friday. It's the BC Juvenile Turf, grade 1 obviously. Dan Illman, let's start with you. How are we going to get our Breeders' Cup started off on the right foot in this race?
Well, I'm happy we're starting off with this race. I'm happy this is the first race because Mike and I think, have distinctly different opinions about the merits of the European horses. I think they're fairly strong in this race, and I think Mike is leaning more towards our North American-based runners. I think Intelligence Cross is okay. He started 6 times sprinting, and when I watch his last race, the Middle Park, it looks like just a even performance, but just watching him run, to me, he looks like a grinding sort that's really going to appreciate stretching out to a mile. And of the European ones, he's the one that's getting bet in the overseas market. I kind of want to corner the Juvenile Turf by saying I want to use one of the Europeans and one North American-based runner. I prefer Intelligence Cross of the Europeans. And I like Keep Quiet of the North American runners. I think he's an under-the-radar horse. He's a very professional sort. He had the worst trip in the With Anticipation when Made You Look came up the rail and he was wide. And last time out in the Bourbon, he just has good tactical speed. He can work out a nice trip. And from post 2 in the Juvenile Turf, I think he's getting another great trip under Florent Giroux. So I'm probably going to be keying most of my play on those 2 horses, the 8 Intelligence Cross, the 2 Keep Quiet.
Good stuff, Dan. 1 foreign, 1 domestic. Mike Beer, how do you see this one?
Yeah, as Dan sort of alluded to in the opening, obviously I think it's good for these kinds of things anyway. Who wants to listen to 2 guys getting along all the time? I don't like the Europeans in this race. Just from going through their races and watching them run, I don't see what's so great about any of their performances necessarily. And I also happen to think that we have a really solid crew of domestic horses over here as our 2-year-old turf horse. I think they're pretty good. I just didn't love Intelligence Cross's races, although obviously he could improve, I guess, with Lasix going on. To me, the best one that I've seen over here, and I say this realizing how fast Good Samaritan ran at Woodbine last time. To me, the best one I've seen is Oscar Performance for Brian Lynch's. To me, it's his last 2 races are just hard to get past for me. I think he's run really, really well both times. He was really impressive, and that adds into the fact that his debut, I thought he ran deceptively well first time out, where he had a real trip in that race at Saratoga. I just think he's good, and I don't love that he has post 14, and I don't love that there's necessarily other speed in this race with Well-Abled stretching out down towards his inside. But, I'm just hoping that Well-Abled makes a good target for him, and that he just shows up and runs his typical race, because I think that makes him really tough. And I like him. I'm not way against Good Samaritan. I like both his races. I'll use him somewhere. And the other horse for me was one of the 2 Pletchers, the 5 Made You Look, whose races are just good. I know he got a perfect trip when he won the With Anticipation last time, but I still think he ran well. I think he can get another good trip in this race with Castellano riding. I thought he was sort of an interesting, bigger priced horse to throw in there.
Quick follow-up, Mike, for you on Oscar Performance and the trip you expect him to get. Do you feel like he's so good that he can overcome going wide into the first turn, or do you see him maybe having enough speed to clear all but Well-Abled and actually being able to tuck in going into that first turn?
Yeah, I don't really see where all the other speed is to his inside. It doesn't, to me, it just didn't look like a field that had a bunch of other speed. It doesn't mean that he won't have to give a little ground into that first turn, and I obviously would hope that he wouldn't get stuck, get spun too wide as they head into that first turn. But I don't know, he seems like a pretty rare 2-year-old turf horse at this time of the year. His races are awful good.
That is evident from the paper. Let's move on to the 7th race, the BC Dirt Mile. A lot of people are talking about Dortmund as a potential short-priced horse to build pick 4s around. Mike Beer, we'll keep it with you. Is that the way you see this race, or do you see it as a race where you're going to want to spread around a little bit?
I won't say I want to spread. I do want to bet against him because I think that Gunrunner is in a really good spot here for Asmussen. I respect Dortmund. Obviously, the class drop is going to do him some good getting away from California Chrome, because he's fairly been embarrassed by that horse in his last couple of races. He's just not that good. I guess this is the right race for him. Dan and I talked about this race a little bit when we did the stakes preview. I still prefer him. I like him going shorter. I still wish Baffert would have skipped this ridiculous race and run him in the 1-turn mile, like a race like the Cigar Mile. Because I really think that's where Dortmund might be at his absolute best. He's way the horse to beat in here. I don't deny it. It's a good spot for him. But I like Gunrunner in here. I like him as well going shorter than the 1.8 miles, 1.25 miles races they've been running him in. I think the mile is perfect for him. I think he was second best in the Travers. He didn't finish second to Arrogant. I think he ran the second best race. And I think, in a lot of ways, looking at the Pennsylvania Derby last time, he was probably best in there. If you reverse trips, I think he wins. I just think he's, sort of one of those underrated, good 3-year-olds who just doesn't really want to go a classic distance. The mile, as opposed to the, Dortmund, just running in this race because they know he can't win the classic. This is the right race for Gunrunner.
Dan, where do you stand on Dortmund?
Well, I think Mike and I agree that Dortmund is the horse to beat, and we're not terrified of him at all, and we're going to try to take a swing against him. And I agree with everything he said on Gunrunner. I made a big bet on Gunrunner in the Pennsylvania Derby. I thought he was a cinch after his good effort, surprisingly good effort. When you get beat 15, you don't usually say good effort. I thought he ran super in the Travers behind a super performance. And in the Pennsylvania Derby, if you switch trips with Connect, he wins the race. He just carried way too much ground. And like Mike, I like him a lot cutting back in distance. If I was going to try to beat Dortmund, the 2 horses I would key on are Gunrunner, and then the horse that I ended up picking in the race, and he's really not my kind of horse, but I think that Kieran McLaughlin is getting Tamarcuz back into form. This is a horse that was the scourge of the Dubai Racing Carnival in the beginning of 2015, and he came in for Kieran. He ran a good fourth in one of the better Met miles in recent years, the Honor Code Tonalist Private Zone Met mile. And then he seemingly went off form a little bit with excuses in some races. His 2 races back, I think the Forgo was a good race. I think the Kelso was kind of a weird race where there wasn't any pace. And Mike Smith, even though he broke well with Tamarcuz, seemed hesitant to put any pressure on Anchor Down. I was a little disappointed that he didn't run Anchor Down in the stretch. But I think he's cycling back to his good form, and he's got at least a little bit of tactical speed. With Run Happy and Dortmund in this race, the pace should be fair to fast. It should set up for mid-pack runners. And I think Gun Runner and Tamarcuz are good-priced runners. Listen, Dortmund, again, his merits are obvious on paper, but you could argue that the Breeders' Cup Classic for Dortmund was the Awesome Again, and I think he was really cranked up for that effort, and California Chrome fairly flicked him away on the backstretch. I wonder if he's a little bit over the top. I kind of agree with Mike that I thought the Cigar Mile might have been a better spot for him stylistically in a one-turn mile. Is he the most likely winner on paper? I guess. At a short price, I don't really want him. I want to key in on Gun Runner and Tamarcuz.
All right, we talked about the Europeans in the other Juvenile Turf race. It's a question that has to be answered again in the 8th race on Friday, the Juvenile Turf Fillies. Dan, are you Team USA here, or are you going to look overseas for the winner?
Well, I'm kind of trying to approach this race the same way I did the Juvenile. I'd like to try to key in on 1 European and 1 North American-based runners. I think the North Americans are solid. Spainberg has been fairly visually impressive in his races, and I know he's taking a lot of money overseas. I think Hydrangea's okay. I thought she was a fine second last time out in that Fillies Mile behind Rhododendron. She's kind of a horse that'll snatch defeat from the jaws of victory with 4 seconds from 6 starts, but she draws well, and I wouldn't be surprised if she gives a very good account of herself for Aidan O'Brien. I guess that's the European I'm most interested in. I like the way New Money Honey won the Miss Griot last time out for Chad Brown. I realize it was yielding going, but she really powered home. I like the way she sat in off the pace. She came 4 wide on the turn, and she just really looked extremely comfortable in the stretch. I don't think it was the yielding ground. I know she was beaten by La Coronel in the debut, and La Coronel's obviously back in here with a lot of hype, but La Coronel drew a pretty lousy post position. So this is a situation in Chad I trust. I think New Money Honey at 10-1 on the morning line is a very solid play, and Hydrangea of the Europeans I think will give a good account of herself as well. She's 6-1 on the line.
Mike Beer, how did you see this race?
I love how diplomatic Illman is. I'll take 1 from each side. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. 1 Euro, 1 American.
I'm hurting 12 horses' feelings.
That's true. As opposed to the male race, I actually like the Europeans that they've sent over for this race. I think they're all pretty good. The one that I liked most was Spainberg. I just think she ran really well in all of her starts over there. And I love that they, sent her out of France to run at Newmarket last time, and she was really impressive winning that race. I think that horse is good. So I'm going to use her, but I thought this was a fairly wide open race. I thought there were a lot of different horses who could win and a lot of different horses to look at. And I ultimately decided that the horse that I'm going to bet in this race and just see what happens at a good price, I would think, is Coasted. And I think, just based on her first couple of turf starts, she seemed to be every bit as good as any other turf filly, 2-year-old turf filly that we have on this side anyway. She, was just so impressive when she won at Saratoga. Her first turf start, she came right back into P.G. Johnson with a little bit of a trip. I mean, things ultimately worked out, but slow pace, blocked through the upper stretch. It was tight. She came through, and then as soon as she got through, she was just way the best in there. And I'm going to give her the yielding ground excuse last time in the Miss Griot. She was down inside again, a little bit tight, but she did get through again. She just didn't quite look the same to me, and I just wonder if she didn't like that cut in the ground last time. She gets firm turf this time. To me, it just seems pretty clear that if she rebounds, if she just wants faster ground, and if she rebounds to one of her good races, I think that she could win this race, and I do think that she might be one of those horses who just goes off at some kind of crazy big price in here. And so I'm going to bet her in what just looks to me like a wide open race.
Makes sense to me. It was bet to favoritism last time against the Chad Armada and has that built-in excuse of the ground. And I think the way that she failed to pick up when the real running started last time. Supports your theory, Mike. Very interesting pick. All right, no race over the 2 days has generated more discussion than the 9th race on Friday, the BC Distaff. Jonathan Kitchen joked with us on the podcast this morning that he's lost friendships over this race. It's fascinating to discuss. We got Andy Beyer all fired up yesterday, though he stopped short of giving out one of his famous no shot declarations about Songbird. Others think she's the single of the 2 days. Can't wait to hear your guys' thoughts. Mike Beer, we'll start with you. Where are you going in the BC Distaff?
You know, it's funny. Before the PPs came out, I was way more against Songbird than I am today. I'm still against her, but now I'm just more against her because, you know, she's just going to be one of those horses. You know, forget about just straight up handicapping, and you know, whether you think she's a good horse or not, all that stuff, it's sort of irrelevant. What it comes down to is, do you want to bet her at 6-5 in the Breeders' Cup, in this Breeders' Cup against this field? That's really all it's about to me, and I personally do not want to bet her at that short of a price against this field. Yeah, she's obviously good. She has an awful lot to prove still. She has, you know, to put it mildly, been beating up on a very suspect group of 3-year-old fillies, horses that she's just a lot better than. She is not. Not only isn't she a lot better than these horses, she's probably not even better than these horses. So, you know, to me, I just can't take a short price on her. I think what she has going for her in this race is a great post position. And, you know, to be perfectly honest, I think a Breeders' Cup Distaff, it just doesn't have that much pace in it. It doesn't mean that there aren't other fast horses. Beholder could be the speed of this race if she wanted to be. I would just be surprised if they rode her that way this time. I don't think they want to be any part of this pace. And, you know, the further Songbird goes without taking a real challenge, the more dangerous she becomes. I think they'll make her race early enough in here, and I won't be using her in any bets that I make in this race because I just think she's a big underlay. I much prefer Stellar Wind to Beholder. I think she's proven it in her 3 starts this year that at this stage of the game, you know, I personally believe that she's just a better horse than Beholder is. And so I prefer her to Beholder. And ultimately, the horse who is going to be the best price that I want to bet that I think has an absolute realistic chance to win this race is Forever Unbridled. She needs a little hitting to go on in front of her. I think she'll get it. You know, I'm not thrilled with the way Dale Stewart's managed her, you know, sort of picking spots and not really getting a full campaign in for her. But, you know, he's run her in all the Grade 1 races that he's technically supposed to run her in because she's a good horse. And I like all of her races, and I think that she has a real shot to win this thing at a fair price. So I picked her on top, and I'll bet her.
All right, Dan, do you see this as a race that has to go to one of the big 3, or like Mike, do you see the opportunity for something a little more unexpected to happen?
No, I think it'll be one of the big 3. I really wish I had a stronger opinion on this race. To me, it's more of a spectacle than a betting race. I think from a pick 4 standpoint, I take the big 3, and if I'm alive, I'm feeling very comfortable while respecting and understanding Mike's opinion on Forever Unbridled. And I understand everything he said about Songbird, and this being a tactical race. The key to the race is who is going to be the one to go after Songbird in the early portion of the race. As you look at the lines, Carolina has shown a little bit of speed. Obviously, Beholder has speed. I think that in Gary Stevens' perfect world, breaking from the outside, and I know that's a big deal for Beholder's fans, that maybe she doesn't like being inside. Personally, I think that's a bit of a flimsy excuse. But I think that being outside, he is going to break, and he's going to break pretty quick. Chatterbox has some speed. Carolina has some speed. And I think that in Beholder's perfect world, she's going to be cruising behind those and hope that one of those 2 soften up Songbird. I think Stellar Wind, as jockey Victor Espinoza, will be hoping for that as well. If you watch Beholder and Stellar Wind's 3 races, I understand anyone's argument that Stellar Wind ran the better race all 3 times, even though Beholder did beat her in that Vanity Mile, a race where there was no pace whatsoever, and Stellar Wind was coming off a layoff. My gut tells me that Beholder's going to run a big race on Friday. I think that she will trip out on the outside. I think she's going to gear up on the turn. And something tells me that she's going to run a big race. It's not really anything handicapping related. It's just more of a gut feeling, which is why I wish, again, I had a stronger opinion and a stronger say. I picked Beholder in here. I think she's going to win.
It makes sense to me. I mean, you watch this filly, and basically all she does is win Grade 1s for, what is it, 4 years going now. I get what you're saying, that it's almost more of a gut thing, Dan, than anything necessarily on the paper that makes you see her to have that Glory Days run and get it done. So many scenarios in here. You can make a case for at least the big three and beyond. Can't wait to see it. Not sure I'll bet a dime on it, but can't wait to see this race on Friday. Mike Hogan, before we move on to Saturday's races, do we have any questions, or do you have any questions for the guys regarding the 4 races we've talked about so far, or should we proceed?
We did have one come in from William Theodore, and I'm imagining that this is intended for Mike based on the opinion that he expressed about Songbird's price at 6-5. He asks, what happens if Songbird goes off at 5-2 and the Beholder Stellar Wind combo is around 2-1? Does your opinion change at all in the race?
No, I mean, I don't want to bet her. I even think 5-2 is probably a little short for me. I just put it this way: 5-2. Getting $7 on Songbird this field, doesn't excite me. I would certainly be happier to maybe use her somewhere if I thought she was going to be that price, but I think there's probably almost no chance that she goes off that kind of a price. So I just think it's kind of a moot point.
I think it's more likely she'd go up under 6-5 than drift as high up as 2-1, and it's not close. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see her hit evens with her legions of fans out there. Let's move on to the Saturday races, starting with the first Breeders' Cup race. It goes as the 4th. It's the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies, 1.16 on Santa Anita's main track. Mike Beer, will ask you first. Who are we going to find to kick off Breeders' Cup Day itself, the Saturday, on the right foot?
It's just such a weak group of 2-year-old fillies. None of them are very fast. There's nothing that impressive about any of the ones who have, sort of worked their way here by winning the stakes races, the logical prep races for this kind of race. I just don't want any of, the Frisette or the Spinaway or the Chandelier or that Alcibiades. I just don't want any of those horses. Maybe it'll turn out to be the wrong way to look at this race, but I don't want them. I was really impressed with the 2 races Baffert's filly American Gal ran this summer. I suspect she's going to be pretty tough in this race, and I suspect that she's going to turn out to maybe be one of the better fillies in this division, and she is bred to go long. So I'm not that worried about her stretching out. We'll see what kind of price she goes on, but I have a feeling that she's going to get bet, and I think she should get bet because I think she's good. And post-12 or not, she seems to have enough speed to come running out of there and get a spot either right on the pace or sitting up there maybe tracking somebody else if they look to be going to her inside. So I like her, but I think she's going to get bet in this race. And so the alternative to her for me was the Marcassi filly, Valladorna. And I know she hasn't run particularly fast figures in her first 2 starts, but she was typical Cassie 2-year-old firster on debut, where she just barely walked out of the gate and was way far behind. And I thought she made a nice run to catch up to that field, but she kept going past the wire. And then she just crushed the field last time at Keeneland, around 2 turns. I like that she did it very handily from off the pace, and she really finished that race off. And she's bred to go on. She's a Curlin. I suspect she might be a little bit of a better price, so I put her on top. But really, for me, it's 3 and 12 in this race, and not anybody else.
All right, strong opinion from Mike Beer. That's what we like to hear. Dan Illman, who's it going to be?
Mike and I think, have the same idea regarding the quality of the division, and we just went a different way with the horse. I'm interested in Rudy Rodriguez's runner, the 7 Jameson and Ginger, and no, I'm not certain that she really did run a 103 Beyer speed figure last time out. Maybe she did. Maybe she was simply a mud move up. It looks that way simply off the page, and the Bernardinis are known for winning on a wet track. Again, my opinion is the established horses in this race are not very good. I want a new face. I want one that can be forward over the sometimes speed-friendly Santa Anita surface, and I think this horse can be forward, and she's got a quality route pedigree. So maybe it was the mud that moved her up. Likely it was a little bit, but maybe it was also distance, because her damn Ginger Brew, and we can take a look at her pedigree, she was a really good horse going long. She won the Woodbine Oaks. She came back 2 weeks later. She got beat ahead in the Queen's Plate as the favorite. She could run all day long, and she could run on dirt, turf, or synthetic. And I just think this is the right spot for a new face. And the two I'm using are the 7 Jameson and Ginger, and one of the horses that Mike mentioned, the 12 American Gal. Again, this track can be speed friendly. American Gal is stretching out from 6 to a mile and a 16th with sprint speed. I think there is a scenario where this horse clears over to the front under Mike Smith and makes the pace. And I think Baffert just entering this horse and wheeling her back in less than 2 weeks is a sign that he believes that the established horses, one of them being his horse, noted and quoted, are not very good. So same idea with Mike, just a little bit of a different opinion. I like 7 and 12, but I understand where Mike's going with Valadorna, who might be more, of a classic two-turn type.
I think that's a great point you make, Dan, about Baffert and American Gal and the wheelback. Should she appear in the starting gate, that would probably be enough of an endorsement from Baffert that he thought she could do it. If he thinks so, you probably don't want to spend too much fading the opinion of a guy like that when it comes to this race. Let's move on to the 5th, which is the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Turf. Dan, are you going to take that same approach again, perhaps with one from the local team and one from the overseas team in this race?
Well, why not? It's worked so well for me thus far, getting hammered by Mike Beer. I guess if you're going to take one from the, American team, boy, what's wrong with Lady Eli? I mean, her merits are obvious on paper. She's a true fan favorite, and I thought she ran really well last time out, conceding ground in her prep race. It appears she's back in her best form. She's going to be a short price, and for that reason alone is a bit uninteresting because I'm not sure she has such an edge over some of these Europeans. There is one European that I do want to fool around with. I'm not sure she's good enough to win, but she is a horse that I will bet to win, and I'll also fool around with in single race exotics underneath, and that's the number 11, Queen's Trust, who I think will drift up off of that 6-1 morning line. Now, yes, she's a turf maiden. Her only win came over synthetic. But she's finished ahead of a couple of these other horses, and I think that last race was okay, going 1.5 miles, a distance that's a little bit far for her. She didn't break very well. She was a bit eager. The jockey wanted to wrangle her all the way back and did so. She was in a little bit of traffic, not so much in the straight, and then she came with a run. But I like the Lasix on. I like the cutback to 1.25 miles. And when you look at Sir Michael Stout's records over the past 5 years, and obviously in Formulator you can go back and take out those 2 Maidan performances. He's 4 for 8. He has won major races like the Filly and Mare Turf with Dank at Santa Anita, and of course dominating races up at Woodbine. He just seems to bring horses over here that fit the North American configuration, and I wonder if Queen's Trust is one of those horses. So Lady Eli, a very logical horse. I think 7th Heaven is a very solid European horse that I'd be using in any kind of multiple race bet. But I think Queen's Trust is a horse I want to key on. I think she'll drift in price.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting opinion. You're right, eligible for a first-level allowance, a maiden on turf, but all of those positives that you point to and a price that should please. And I just have to second everything you said about Michael Stout and how seriously you have to take him when he throws runners over here. Some trainers send them over here, they throw it against the wall, they see if it sticks. Stout certainly seems to know what it takes. Mike Beer, where did you end up in this race?
I don't have a lot to add to what Dan said. I think we sort of like the same 3 horses. I'll use Lady Eli in any multis that I play, but I won't bet her to win. Probably the favorite in this race. And like Dan, I'm not sure that she has some kind of huge edge, but she's certainly a very good horse. I think Dan makes a very interesting and often overlooked point about Queen's Trust, and the Michael Stout stuff aside, just the fact that it's very important. It's really important over there. It's very important just in general to just pay attention to the distances these horses run and which ones are their preferred ones. And I think with Queen's Trust, her preferred distance is pretty clearly this one, 10 furlongs, and not the 1.5 miles. They gave her chance in those 2 Group 1s last time going further, but she's better at 1.25 miles so far. And she ran really well in that Nassau Stakes 3 times, 3 starts back, when she really made, minding a really good 3-year-old filly over there, and she made that horse work really hard to beat her in that race. So I think the cutback to 10 is a real benefit for that horse. And I think she's a huge player in here, and I agree with them on 7th Heaven as well, who just, in a lot of ways, 7th Heaven could be the horse to beat in here. A 3-year-old is 1/2 of her races, and aside from the that the Epsom Oaks there, where she never looked that comfortable in that race and just didn't fire at all. Her other races surrounding that are all really good. She finishes really hard from off the pace. She beat Found 2 starts back, and she beat her fair and square. And, you know, she had a bit of a trip last time. She was behind Queen's Trust last time, but she could never get clear. Ryan Moore had a lot of trouble getting her someplace to run late in that race. So that race isn't as bad as it looks. So, you know, Dan and I just agree. Those 2 Europeans, Seventh Heaven and Queen's Trust, and I'll use Lady Eli somewhere.
Yeah, just to further your point, Mike, Epsom is one of those courses. Some horses just don't handle it. That's camber in the stretch, very unusual configuration, completely logical that a horse wouldn't handle that and be able to show all kinds of form somewhere else. Mike Hogan been doing a fine job demonstrating some of the features of Formulator as we've been talking, going back and showing the dam and the race records of the dam as we go, and all sorts of fun features that Formulator has to offer. I understand you have a question from the audience in this race?
Yeah, Chris Watts wants to know about number 13, Nuevo Record, the Japanese import, seemingly off form this year, but wants to know if worth keeping or tossing in the Filly Mare Turf.
Nuevo Record has taken on obviously some very good horses this year. Maurice is probably right now the best handicap horse, so to speak, which is a turf router, older turf router over there. Just won the 10-0 show, and Rainbow Line, the third-place finisher, came out of that. Sapporo Keen Enter on second in the Kika show, the Japanese St. Ledger. So the fact that she was 9-2 in that field and finishing fourth in that good field is a sign that perhaps she is coming back into form, but it's been a long time between drinks for her. And when you've thrown her up there in the Group 1 races in Japan, she has trouble. She did run well in that Hong Kong Cup, but the QE2 Cup, a couple of other races, to me, I just think she's kind of up against it in this field.
Seems like a fair assessment. Some big races back there, but boy, some real quality on hand for this race, and it would take some doing. All right, let's go to the 6th race, the BC Sprint. Dan, we'll keep it with you for your thoughts on this small but competitive field.
Very competitive. I mean, I think the sprint division is super this year. You've got Masochistic, who's a wickedly fast horse. You've got Lord Nelson, who very quietly has amassed 3 Grade 1 stakes. And you've got AP Indian, who's 6 for 6 this year and the best sprinter on the East Coast. And they're not the only horses in this race. Mike and I think, look at Drafang's last race, the King's Bishop, and say, boy, how did that happen? In the signature 3-year-old dirt sprint race in all of North America, the King's Bishop, somehow Drafang from post position 12 was able to clear off to a very easy lead over a speed-favoring track and kept right on going. And maybe I'm just supposed to throw a horse like that out who earned a big number off of a candy situation. But I've always liked this horse. I liked him as a 2-year-old. He missed a lot of time with injury. He's come back roaring at 3. And yes, he had an easy trip last time out, but boy, he ran in the stretch. I like the way he put daylight between himself and his competition at the 3/16th Bowl. Smith pretty much had him ridden out. And I also like Bob Bapper these kind of layoffs in these major races. We saw it last year with American Pharaoh. We've seen it with Lord Nelson and a couple of other horses in the past come off 61 to 180s in sprint races. He's actually 30% over the past 5 years with that move. So I don't know. I think that Drafang has got a lot of upside. He's the horse with the upside in the race, and I'm banking on a forward move.
All right. We've seen that success before from 3-year-olds. We've seen the success with layoff horses. It makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you said that, Dan, because I was looking at that King's Bishop and thinking, you know, I don't know if I could bet the horse coming off that trip, but these points of yours are pushing me back to my original opinion, which is that I do think he's a major player in the race. Mike Beer, what about you? Who did you come up with in the Breeders' Cup Sprint?
Oh, my God. You guys are so wrong about this wrong. Why would you want to bet this horse? Who wants to bet this horse? I don't know. Listen, I know he's talented. I'm just kidding a little bit. But boy, that was a sight to behold in that King's Bishop, with everybody just taking a hold and turning this horse loose on the front end. Yeah, listen, maybe he's good. I know he's got a lot of upside, and I understand too that the older sprinters in this country the last few years, they're just not that good. I think we're in a similar situation here with the sprint from last year, where the older sprinters weren't that good. Run Happy, the 3-year-old, who just could do no wrong throughout the year, showed up in the Breeders' Cup and took care of business against those horses. And maybe Drefong's sort of the same thing. It's interesting because Run Happy had a similar thing go on in his King's Bishop last year, where he got loose on the lead somehow in a pace that didn't develop, and he won, and he was able to back it up on Breeders' Cup Day. I personally am going to be surprised if Drefong can do the same thing that Run Happy did last year. I don't think this horse has any kind of price in this race, and I don't even like him a little bit. And I'm just not going to use him. And if he wins, that's great. I'll be out of everything. I like AP Indian. I like every race that he's run this year. I like how handy and tactical he's become as an older horse to get any kind of a trip. And I know that, last time it looks like maybe he took a step back. Maybe he did. I didn't think he did. I think he was good again in the Phoenix. I think he was good for the 6th time in a row. And I just like him. I think he's going to get a good trip in this race, tracking. I feel like Masochistic probably makes the front, and he's fast, and I'm afraid of him. But I still think he's got a lot to prove, and he just seems a little bit hard for me to trust in this race. I like AP Indian in here, and that's the horse I'm going to lean on in any multi-race wagers that I make.
A lot of Breeders' Cup races are known for their ability to make handicappers' skulls hurt. I'm going to put this year's Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint in that category, at least for me. Mike, maybe you can help me out. You have a strong opinion in here, a direction to lean?
No, I can't help you at all, I don't think. I mean, I feel like I wanted to make a case for everybody in here, and I could have done it easily. What I do think is this. I think that this is a great spot. First of all, let me say this. I don't want any of the Europeans in this race. You don't see a lot of them typically in our Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint races, and I think that's because they don't, it's not a great division for them over there. The fact that they're, sort of more supportive of this race this year, maybe that means something. Maybe they just have a better crew of them this year, but I don't like them, and I'm not going to use the Europeans in this race. I like a lot. I think that he's going to run better for Chad here. I think he went great last time anyway in the 4-Star Dave, a race that, just set up terribly for him after he got bumped at the start and wound up last and had to make a run through the stretch. I thought he went great, and he's just, to me, he's a better horse going shorter. So he's very logical to me. The horse that I ultimately picked on top and who I will bet a few dollars on at a big price, if she is in fact a big price, is Celestine, the 14. She's got a race in her that I think makes her really tough in this race. And I like that she has a little speed, too. She doesn't need the lead, but she's got speed, and she'll come running out of there from the outside and get up close to the pace. You go back to her form, from early on last year. She showed that she can sprint. She is an effective horse at a shorter distance. She's probably a true miler, but she will go shorter. And, she has that just a game still staring in the face. She was gigantic that day. 2 starts back at Belmont. Issue since then. Came back in a pretty tough spot in that First Lady, I think. She was done no favors with photo calls, just running off on a long lead in there. I think it worked against her. I'm hoping she takes a step forward in this race, and maybe she'll be around 10-1, and I could, sort of fool around with her.
Dan, you've been very political so far in your discussion of the whole England, Ireland, Europe versus America thing. Will that pattern maintain here, or do you agree with Dan that maybe the Euro sprinters are up against it facing these USA ones?
I think usually the European sprinters pale in comparison to ours, although if I absolutely had to take one, I think Washington, D.C. is the one. He seems to be the one that's getting bet the most over there, and last time out in the Prix de la Baie, he might have been covered up way too long. He wasn't produced till about the furlong marker, and he came with a strong run. Of the Europeans, I like him, but I want to bet a lot in here, and it really all depends on trip. And I'm sure Michael can put up Chad Brown's record over the past 5 years on turf route to sprint. He cuts horses back, and he does it very, very well. And one of those notable horses, of course, is Bobby's Kitten, who won the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint after previously competing in a 1-mile race. I believe it was the Woodbine Mile. A lot is a 6.5, 7-furlong horse. And because there are not a lot of opportunities on turf for horses like that in North America, he has been forced with his previous trainer, Bill Mott, and with Chad in the last race, the 4-Star Dave, to run at middle distances, which does not suit him. even though it doesn't suit him, he ran really well in the 4-star Dave because he was pinballed early in the start. There was no pace on. He tried to come from last, and he ran really well against a good field. And his Jaipur and his elusive quality were both good. This is a horse that's going to get some pace to run at. It all depends on trip, obviously, and whether it'll handle the downhill configuration. But I like cutbacks down the hill usually. I like cutbacks trained by Chad Brown, and I especially like this horse particularly on the cutback. So I'm betting a lot in the Turf Sprint.
All right, I like it, and that does help. You guys are very helpful to me there. One of the ones who'd been on my short list helping me zero in a little bit. Excellent points all around on a lot. We've got 5 more races left to discuss and about 20 minutes to do it. The first one is the BC Juvenile. Grade 1 mile and a 16th goes as the 8th. Dan, we'll keep it with you for your thoughts on this. Another race that has seemingly a bunch of different ways you can go.
Now, you can go so many different ways, and for me, this is a spread race. I don't have a very strong opinion on it. I think Gormley is a very nice horse. I like what he's done in both starts. I have to use him. He has a little bit of the home court edge on these runners. I think Classic Empire, barring that one hiccup in the Hopeful, has been very, very impressive. And with the blinkers, his newfound tactical speed and professionalism makes him tough. I guess of the shorter-priced runners, those two are the ones I'd key in. I really do like Not This Time, but I have a feeling that he's going to take the lion's share of the money and will end up the favorite. I think a Classic Empire and Gormley are the 2 logical horses I like in this race, but I'm also going to use 3 Rules, the 6, and listen, maybe he's up against it from a class standpoint. He's been beating up absolutely nothing down in South Florida, but he's been beating nothing the way you're supposed to beat nothing, with impunity. His last race by 10 going 2 turns. He'll have to probably deal with Syndergaard early, and maybe he'll crack like an egg, but I don't want him to be 6 for 6 without me at a bigger price, so I'll use him as well. But I think those are probably the 3 I'll be keying in on: Classic Empire, Gormley, and this price source 3 Rules might be a win stab.
Mike Beer, is this a spread race for you, or can you narrow it down?
Yeah, I think you'll probably be well served spreading in here. I don't know how easy it is to separate. A lot of these horses are good. It's a good group of 2-year-old colts. From a wagering perspective, I would just say, for this race straight up, I would just say let price be your guide. I mean, somebody's falling through the cracks here. And we'll see. I sort of agree with Dan that Not This Time. He's the one that I like, but I sort of have this, awful feeling that he's going to be like 5-2 or something in this race. I just wouldn't bet him at that kind of a price. But I do think he's good, and I do think he's going to have, he's going to have pace to run at in this race. There's just no way he doesn't catch a pace in here with Syndergaard drawn down in post 2, a really fast horse. To me, I think the most interesting horse in the race, and I like Cassie's horse as well, Classic Empire, I think is good. The most interesting horse is Theory, Pletcher's horse, who sounded like in the summer he was gone and he wasn't coming back for the rest of the year. But they brought him back in the futurity, and they rode him in that. He won easy, but they rode him like they were, they had their eye on something bigger and longer in the near future. And he shows up there. I think the fact that he shows up in this race says a lot about how they feel about him, and he's run very, very well in his 2 starts. He is not a horse I would be leaving out at a big price, if he is a big price.
Mike Hogan and I were at Belmont that day of the Futurity, and it was one of those like sort of elbowing each other on the gallop out, even if you're not a big gallop out person, seeing how Theory ran through the wire straight as a string, being asked, clearly being prepped for this bigger test. It was eye-popping and certainly notable that day at Belmont. That's another interesting one to include in a very cool race. Let's go to the Breeders' Cup Turf. Boy, talk about an interesting race. We've got the 1-2 from the Arc. I'm not sure that's ever happened before in a Breeders' Cup Turf. Of course, in Europe, the biggest turf race, not the Breeders' Cup Turf, but the Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. So terrific to have the exacta finishers from that one back, and not the only ones who have a chance in here. Mike Beer, what are you going to do to get through this race?
I found this race pretty tough to get clever in. I just, the top 3, the top 2 from the Arc, and then of course the sort of the big gun that we have over here now, who we will take as ours now, Flintshire. I don't know. They seem like the right 3 to me. I had a really tough time getting beyond those horses. I love Found as a horse. I just love the way they campaign her. They race her a lot, and they run her in every single big race that they have over there, and there has not been a time yet that she didn't come through for them. She runs every time. Her Arc was really impressive, and the 2 races surrounding that, where she got in against the best horse in Europe, Almanzor. She ran really well in those two. I don't know. I picked her. I don't really care about this race that much from a wagering perspective. For multi-race wager purposes, I wouldn't leave Flincher out. He's going to run better than he did last time. He didn't seem to like that given the ground that he had. Highland Reel seems pretty logical to me. The handy kind of horse. I think he'll be close to the pace. No match for Found in his last two starts, but I think it's worth pointing out that in that race 2 back, that Irish Champions Stakes, there was a pretty big pace going on in that race. And Highland Reel is one of those horses. He likes to sit close, and he was close in that race. And I think it cost him that day. He got tired in the stretch, but that was the kind of race that fell apart. And he rebounded nicely in the R class time.
Coolmore seemed to have a ridiculously strong hand with those two. Probably the best speed, probably the best closer. Are the Irish going to take this one, Dan, or do you give some count to some of the other contenders?
Well, as Mike said, I think one of the big three probably wins this race, whether it's Flincher, Found, or Highland Reel. But I would caution everyone, and this perhaps might be a laughable opinion, let's not give short shrift to Ecto. And I know that Ecto's win in the Joe Hurst Turf Classic was almost laughed at because it was he moved up on a yielding ground and the other three horses couldn't stand up on it. But it was only a couple of years ago, and Ecto was 6-1 in the Arc de Triomphe, and Flincher in that same race was 20-1. Ecto was a pretty good horse, a Group 1 winner as I believe it was a 2-year-old in 2013, a multiple group winner as a 3-year-old, and I just wonder if Todd Pletcher is slowly getting him back on track. I mean, it's not like he was just exclusively a wet turf course horse over there, and I think he's going right to the front in here under Jose Ortiz. It's unlikely that he'll take this field gate to wire, but he's a horse I think that'll be ignored. I mean, you can take him lightly based on that race and say that last race is phony if he was something like 3-1 in here, but I think he'll be 15. So maybe you can use him as well at a decent enough number. He used to be a good horse, and maybe, just maybe, Todd's figured him out.
It certainly wouldn't be the first time Pletcher was able to bring one back to their best form. Mike Hogan, we have an audience question for this one?
We do. Jeffrey Nuss wants to know about your thoughts on Mondialiste as a potential price play in the turf. Dan, I guess we'll start with you.
Mondialiste has a tremendous resume, doesn't he, with a win in the Woodbine Mile and a win in the Arlington Million. Personally, I think he belongs in the mile. I think he would run well there after being compromised by a lack of pace in the Shadwell Turf Mile. Listen, your guess is as good as mine how he's going to perform at a 1.5 miles. I guess he has pedigree, but I don't want him trying this distance for the first time.
Anything to add on Mondialiste, Mike Beer, or shall we move it along to the Filly and Mare Sprint?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think they're running him in the wrong race on Saturday.
It is confusing. David O'Mara, very respected trainer, but it does seem puzzling on its face. As for that Filly and Mare Sprint, why don't we we'll keep it with Dan. We'll get you to go first on this one. Seems like with the big races coming up after it, the big race before it, this is a race where I think a lot of people are going to try in a contest like the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, maybe to make a move, maybe to have something happen before we get on to the Mile and the Classic. If you were putting together a contest play in a contest like that, Dan, where would you go in the Filly and Mare Sprint?
Be looking at two horses, the 6 By the Moon and the 12 Finest City. Listen, I respect what Tom Morley's done with Have You Gone Away. She deserves to be the favorite based on her last 3 races, but she doesn't have such an edge that she should be 5-2 in this field. And horses like By the Moon should be 8-1 and Finest City 12-1 on the line. I like By the City's last race in the Ballerina. While she's only 1 for 6 at 7 furlongs, I think Mike and I would agree that she is truly a 7 furlong specialist. And other than that one race, the Distaff Handicap, that didn't have any pace, every race since, the Acorn has been very good. She's trained by a good one in Michelle Nevin. I really like By the Moon, and I'm looking forward to betting her because she has the tactical speed to get a good trip. And I love cutbacks at 7 furlongs, Finest City, Turf to Dirt, Route to Sprint, last time in against Beholder and Stellar Win. She fits from a class standpoint. A
good case for the JMS Stables runner. Mike Beer, any strong opinion here?
Yeah, I like Chad's one of Chad Brown's horses in here. I don't like Wavell Avenue, who also didn't like in this race last year either. I do like Irish Jasper though. I just feel like she might be right horse, right time. I think Chad's improved her since he took over her training. She was a good 3-year-old anyway. But she was more of a one-run closing sprinter as a 3-year-old. I think Chad's gotten her more forward in her races. She ran fast. 2 starts back, she came back in that TCA last time. She had a little bit of a trip behind Stonetastic in there, and she still came and ran her over in the stretch. I just think this filly has found the right group of, this sort of not so great filly and mare sprinters. I think she's hitting this race at the right time. I have nothing bad to say about Have You Gone Away. I just don't want to bet her at any kind of short price in this race.
Mike Hogan, we have a question on this race before we get to the late double.
We do. Chris Watts wants to know what you guys think about Wonder Gal at a big price. Does she have a chance, or is she a toss?
To me, it's fairly interesting that while she's run some good races, I mean, she's 3 for 3 against New York breds. She's 0 for 11 against everybody else. I don't know. I'm not sure I buy that fig. 2 starts back. Visually, it was good, but she'd never been that kind of horse before. She just didn't do any running in the Gallant Blue. Maybe the muddy track is an excuse. I just don't like her at this point in her career with all the injuries she's suffered against sort of top quality horses.
Mike Beer, I heard cynical sounds coming from your microphone.
I'll just second that without going too far into it. I mean, she's lost me. I was a big fan of hers at the start, and I really felt like there was just no doubt she was going to win something good for Lee, and it just didn't happen for her. She's had a lot of things go wrong. Forget about the race 2 back. Make of that what you will. Her race, the races surrounding that, the Fritchie and the Gallant Bloom, she was just awful in both of those.
Yeah, well, maybe State Bred's the place where she will continue to find success. Let's go on to the Breeders' Cup Mile. Teppan aiming for a repeat here. Mike, can she do it?
Sure, she could do it. I'll give her, Dan and I talked about this on the stakes preview, I'll give her the respect she deserves in this race. I won't be betting her in here. Obviously won't be unhappy if she manages to repeat in this race, but I'm not betting Teppan in this race. I think this is a tough spot for her. I don't know. I felt like before the PPs came out, as a matter of fact, as soon as that Shadwell Turf Mile was over, I thought one thing: Ironicus is going to be way overbet in the Breeders' Cup Mile. He is going to be so overbet, the big wise guy horse in there. And for a horse with his running style, that's just a terrible thing. The more I look at this race, the more I think this is a great spot for Ironicus. And I just like him in this race. I think he needed that last one. I think he ran really well into a terrible setup. And I think this race is a better one for him. And so I wound up picking him. But I think there are, other interesting ways to go. I feel like I would maybe use Lamato somewhere, the European who's trying to stretch to a mile. I don't know if he wants to go this far. As a matter of fact, it seems like he doesn't. But if he's going to get the mile, he'll get it at Santa Anita on a really fast turf course. So I think he's dangerous, and for my long shot that I'm throwing in, I'm using Ring Weekend for Grand Motion. I'm not a huge fan. Never really felt like he was this good, but I think he ran sneaky well last time in that Shadwell. He had a pretty tough trip in that race, wide off a slow pace. I thought he ran deceptively well, so I'm gonna throw him in there at a price.
Dan Illman, who is it in the Breeders' Cup Mile?
I think it's going to be Alice Springs. I've really liked her last 2 races for Aidan O'Brien. Obviously, fillies have done well in this race. She ran well over an Americanized setting last year in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf. She's got a very strong kick. I like what she's done in her last few races. I'm using her and Ironicus mostly in the multiple race wagers. Mike pretty much said it all with Ironicus. He had no pace last time out, and there's going to be speed with Midnight Storm in this race. I am Teppan's biggest fan. I would not be surprised if she wins. Part of me as a fan wants her to win, but part of me also realizes that her last 2 races since she's come back from Royal Ascot have been more workmanlike than the usual brilliant Teppan that we've seen, and she's going to be a short price based on her popularity. So Alice Springs is my top pick. I will be using Ironicus and maybe a little bit of Lamato in the multis.
All right, the Breeders' Cup Classic is the last of the races we'll be talking about today. Dan, we'll start with you with a simple question. Is this a match race between number 4 California Chrome and number 10 Arrogant?
I think it is, and that says much about them other than the rest of the horses, because the rest of the horses in these races, they're good horses. But California Chrome and Arrogant just seem to be head and shoulders above them at this point. Like the Distaff, to me, this is more of a great exhibition to watch than truly a betting race. I'll use the big 2 in multiple race wagers and hope I'm alive. California Chrome has been so brilliant in his last few races, and I think he's just going to go to the front in here and make Arrogate chase him. I don't know. I was so wowed by Arrogate's Travers, and I know if you take that race out of the PPs, he'd be pale in comparison to California Chrome. To me, he's just a lightly raced 3-year-old. The sky's the limit from a potential standpoint. He'll offer better value than California Chrome. If you had to make me make a pick of the two, it would be the better priced one, Arrogate, but I use both in the multis. It should be a fantastic race.
Mike Beer, how do you see this fascinating rendition of the Breeders' Cup Classic?
Yeah, sort of the same way as Dan. I mean, obviously Arrogate will be the better price in this race. That's not all he has going for him, though. He'll be the better price in this race, and if he runs his last race, he'll win. I don't know if he can run that Travers again, and he's going to have to do it, even if he, can't. If that's his real level of ability, he's going to have to do it in a totally different situation here with a much, much, much better horse probably in front of him that he's going to have to chase. But if that's a real performance, and he's sort of hinted in his 3 races before the Travers anyway that this horse might be okay, if that's his real level of ability, then California Chrome better have him nailed on tight on Saturday. It's going to be a very interesting race to watch. If Arrogate is indeed, 5-2, 3-1, then I will bet him and take a chance. But I'll cover them both in the pick 4.
I had a question come in I want to ask you guys. It comes from our friend Harvey Pack, who is eagerly anticipating the chance to bet the Breeders' Cup this year, and he was looking for a little bit of help, a couple of places to bet a few bucks and try to have a great 2 days of the Breeders' Cup. And he wanted you guys to each give him one horse that he can throw in his action that he can rely on over the 2 days. Dan, we'll start with you. Who you want to give to Harvey as a horse to key around on Friday or Saturday?
I'm going to give Harvey a lot in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint, and if I have to go somewhere else, it would. I guess if I had to give my top 3 in order, it would be a lot in the Turf Sprint, By the Moon in the Filly and Mare Sprint, and Alice Springs in the Mile.
I like it. Mike Bear, you can emulate Dan and give 3. You can give 1. Your strongest opinions, places you're excited about betting, we can pass along to Harvey.
I just want to bet, as far as just straight-out betting goes, I want to bet Coasted on Friday in the Juvenile Turf race, Juvenile Fillies Turf race. She should be the right kind of price to just take a shot and try and make a score. Do I have 2 others that I definitely want to give him? I could give him Celestine. I would take a little chance with Celestine in the Turf Sprint. I think she's interested in there. And then I'll throw him the Chad horse in the Filly Mare Sprint, Irish Jasper.
He loves a good exacta, so having a couple in the Turf Sprint is that's a good way to go. Mike Hogan, we've got a minute or 2 left on the show. Does the audience have another question to ask the guys? Do you have another question to ask the guys before we let them get on with starting to formulate their wagers for the Breeders' Cup?
Well, we did have a couple people asking about Frosted's chances, and we haven't even mentioned Frosted, who is, at least in terms of the buyer speed figures, the 123 earned in the Met Mile, the fastest horse in the race. Do you guys think he has a chance to upset, or is this just maybe the wrong race for him?
I mean, he's obviously can win that race. That Met Mile showed it, but it was at a 1-turn mile, and he's a nice horse. His two races subsequently after the Met Mile, one was good, one was fair, and that's not going to do it in the form that California Chrome has been in for, a year now, and, Arrogate's Travers. I also think he's slightly better at a shorter distance. Can he win? Sure.
Mike Beer, your thoughts on Frosted?
Yeah, listen, I agree 100% with Dan. He can win. He's already shown that he has a race in him that would beat this field, but I'd be personally surprised if he ran that well on Saturday. I've never really felt like a mile and a quarter. I never really felt like it does him any favors. I think he wants to go shorter than this. California Chrome obviously handled him very easily in Dubai. I know there was no Lasix that day, but I don't know if that's a real excuse for Frosted. I think he's up against it on Saturday.
Mike Hogan, anything else from you or the audience?
No, the only thing I'll mention is those listening live should join us tomorrow with Matt Bernier. Pete and I and Jonathan Kinchin will be on covering the second half of the Breeders' Cup races at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific Time, and then in the afternoon, Pete and I will be back for another one of these with Jay Privman and Mike Vesci at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. That's all I've got.
That's cool. I can't wait. That's going to be a lot of fun. Just another reminder, if you want to catch the archive of this broadcast or any of our handicapping sessions that we've done along the way, drf.com/YouTube is the place to go. If you want more from Dan Illman and Mike Beer, and I know you do, keep it tuned to DRF Live this weekend. Lots of coverage of the Breeders' Cup races. Make sure to stay tuned to that. I want to thank Dan and Mike. I want to thank Mike Hogan for producing. I want to thank everybody who tuned in, and especially our sponsor, Keeneland Select, for bringing this Breeders' Cup content to you. You've been watching a webinar produced by drf.com.